It's a three-part video. Part number 1, what will be different, APS-C versus full frame. Part 2, how hard can you push a crop sensor camera to perform full frame? And part 3, decision-making time. It's going to be a long video. We're going to look at examples, options, alternatives in detail. So in the end, after working this complex question from a few different angles, you will arrive at a clear and simple understanding of the problem and make your decision. Part 1. Some things are just different in between the two systems, and you cannot compensate for those either. There are 3. Form factor, price, and dynamic range/color. Form factor usually goes a little something like this: large sensor, large camera, large lens, large ecosystem. For example, 2 pounds on APS-C gets you a camera, a lens, the lens hood, filter, a battery grip, 2 extra batteries, and a QR plate. Whereas on full frame, you might just get a lens. APS-C gear you can carry in a messenger bag without ruining your posture or getting tension headaches. And when it's with you, it's a chill experience. You can enjoy your friends, your family, nature, whatever. And when it's time to shoot some stills or video, it's there for you, always, even if it's just as an option. Full frame gear, on the other hand, kind of demands you to use it because it tends to get pretty heavy. So on a sunny day hiking, you might as well sweat profusely carrying full frame gear. So to bring full frame gear without the definite intention to use it kind of makes you a masochist. Accordingly, you will definitely carry full frame gear in a backpack. Make no mistake about it. Even if asymmetrical is 100% your way of life and you totally adore messenger bags, you will only do that once. After a couple of hours, you will arrive at a conclusion that opting for ease of use over style makes a lot of sense, and you will get a backpack. Of course, there are also compact full frame lenses. However, topping the list of reasons to get a full frame camera are fast, hence big, zoom lenses for which there is no equivalent on the APS-C system, at least at the moment. Next up, price. And let's make this very simple. This combo right here, Sony A7III 1635 f2.8 G Master super wide angle zoom. If you're getting really good deals on both of those, you're still looking at roughly 3,500 US. And that is being generous. Now, 3,500 US on APS-C gets you the following. A camera, for example, the A6400 right here, including the kit lens, a nice gimbal, a nice tripod, a pretty decent shotgun mic, a wireless microphone solution on top of that, a third-party battery grip, a nice ring light, 4 extra batteries, including chargers, a GorillaPod focus, a studio monitor, and you got some change left over for spare cables, a filter, a backdrop, a cage, whatever. So basically, 3,500 on APS-C gets you the whole YouTube studio, including some filmmaking gear, including vlogging gear. Whereas full frame gets you a body and a lens. Really let that one sink in for a moment. Deep. Alright, let's get a little technical. Dynamic range and color. Big sensor, big pixels, better dynamic range and color. Oversimplified, but I want to get the bare bones concept across. So here's what it means in real life. High contrast subject. Very dark shadow areas and very bright highlight areas. On the left, shot on APS-C, and on the right, same shot using the full frame A7 III. Same settings with both cameras. Let's compare the shadow and highlight areas. More details in either one on the full frame camera. Now let's apply some post-production to the APS-C image and see how close we can get to the full frame results. There you go, more shadow detail, much closer to the result out of the A7 III. Let's do the same thing with the highlights. Again, a little better, closer to the full frame result. Of course, you can also post-produce the full frame image and again accentuate the differences in performance. With video, we basically get the same results, but less margin to tweak the footage. Of course, simply exposing for the highlights and letting the shadows drop is an option. Even the other way around can work quite beautifully given the right scenario. Color rendering usually benefits from larger pixels as well, because light carries the color information with it, and the finer the distinguishation between levels of brightness, the finer the distinguishation of tone in color. Then again, the quality of the glass you're using and the internal processing are contributing factors to the final result as well. But as we can see here, the APS-C6400 with A9 processing and the Sigma 30mm f1.4 can produce results very similar to the full-frame A7III. So what's it look like between the two so far? Differences in form factor? Big. Differences in price? Really big. Differences in quality? Not so big. Part 2. So let's talk about the things that are surprisingly easy to shift towards full-frame performance without any kind of post-production. Again, there's 3. Number 1, field of view, aka FOV or viewing angle. More than anything, the millimeter value of a lens refers to the field of view it offers. Number 2, bokeh or background blur. Bigger sensor, more bokeh. Technically incorrect, but taking into account how you generally use a camera and frame a shot specifically, you in effect get more background blur on a bigger sensor. Number 3, low light performance. Oversimplification, bigger sensor, bigger pixels, better low light performance of the sensor. But there is pretty damn good and fast APS-C glass out there that can compensate for the lag in sensor/pixel size. But let's start with FOV. The FOV, or field of view, of a 24mm lens on a full-frame camera looks like this, for example. Same shot, same distance from the subject, APS-C looks like this, cropped in, hence the name crop factor camera. If you want the full-frame field of view on an APS-C camera, here's what to do. Divide the millimeter value of the full-frame lens by the APS-C camera's crop factor. In case of Sony crop cameras, the crop factor is 1.5. So 24 divided by 1.5 roughly equals 16 millimeters. So let's use 16 millimeters on the crop camera, and there we go. Almost the same field of view as on the full-frame A7 III. A couple more examples of popular lenses: 85mm portrait lens, 55mm on APS-C. 35mm film lens, roughly 24mm on APS-C. 16mm for architectures and landscape, roughly 10mm on APS-C. Super simple to figure this out really. Basically from 16 to 600mm on full frame, you have all the options you need to emulate that kind of field of view on an APS-C camera. Next up, and closely related to FOV, bokeh, aka background blur. Large sensors don't give you more bokeh. Same lens, same subject, same distance from the subject, both cameras get you exactly the same amount of bokeh. Here we can see 30mm APS-C on the left versus 30mm full frame on the right. Same f-stop, same bokeh. Different field of view, with full frame being much wider. Now let's move in closer to the subject with a full frame camera to get roughly the same framing. Now, with the full frame camera being closer, we get roughly the same framing, but more bokeh. Because, everything else being equal, the shorter the focusing distance, the more blurry the background. Now let's see what we can do on the APS-C side to match the full frame performance. Simple math. Divide the full frame f-stop by the crop factor of the APS-C camera. So in the example, 2.8 divided by 1.5 roughly equals f1.8. So let's go to f1.8 on the APS-C camera and see what we get. And there we go, we're much closer now to the full frame result. However, using the Sigma we can push it a little further and go to f1.4 to get even more bokeh. And looking at both results in terms of background blur now, I have to say the APS-C camera compares quite favorably to the full frame camera, given that on the APS-C side we're talking round about a third of the price. Bokeh is all about fast lenses. Low f-stop values. f2.8 on full frame roughly equates to f1.8 on APS-C. f1.8 on full frame roughly equates to f1.2 on APS-C. And f1.4 on full frame roughly equates to f0.9 on APS-C. This works if we're talking same millimeter values, because the second most important factor that contributes to bokeh or background blur is the millimeter value of the lens. High millimeters, more bokeh. Low millimeters, less bokeh. So the perfect combo for maximum bokeh is high millimeters and the low f-stop value. Another example, classic portrait lens 85mm f1.8 on full frame. Roughly equates to 55mm f1.2 on APS-C. Classic film or street stills, 35mm f2 on full frame, roughly equates to 24mm f1.4 on APS-C. These lenses, for example, do exist. But as a rule of thumb, the wider and faster you go, the more difficult it is to manufacture APS-C equivalents. As of right now, we're at 24mm f2 on full frame, the APS-C equivalent being this Sigma 16mm f1.4. If you want autofocus. The size spot is 18mm f2.8, a close equivalent being the Samyang 12mm f2, which is awesome if you don't need autofocus because it's a manual lens. So as far as prime lenses are concerned, you're pretty much covered. Fast zoom lenses? Not so much. Before we move on to part 3, let's touch on spatial compression. On the left, APS-C 16mm f1.8, on the right, full frame 24mm f2.8. Bokeh and field of view translations are correct. And the results are pretty similar. For this example, let's remove the millimeter translation and look at 16mm full frame. As we know, much wider field of view. And now we'll reframe the shot so the foreground subject on the right will be of similar size compared to the example on the left. In this case, that means moving the full frame camera closer. And this is what happens if we do that. More distortion on the foreground subject and less spatial compression, meaning the background looks much smaller in relation to the foreground subject on the full frame camera. It looks like there is more space between foreground and background, hence less compressed. So in essence, if your gear allows you to do the translations, in most scenarios you can almost perfectly emulate the background blur and field of view of a full frame camera on an APS-C system. But as soon as your gear doesn't allow for the correct and complete translations, you will have to evoke the ISO, use a different millimeter lens, or change the position of the camera relative to your subject. And that's when looks start going different directions. It's by no means the end of the world, but it happens. And a lot of what makes the difference you can attribute to differences in the levels of compression of space. To wrap up part 2, let's check out Lowlight performance. Determining factors 3. Pixel size, processing, f-stop. We're going to look at pixel size and f-stop value because processing is a bit of a wild card in that it varies in quality from camera to camera, possibly even from firmware to firmware. Whereas pixel size and f-stop are factors that stay the same in case of pixel size and that we can actually work with in case of f-stop value. We have to look at two things separately: overall brightness of the image and noise levels. Here's why. APS-C left, full frame right. Field of view translated 16mm APS-C left, 24mm full frame right. Pretty much identical it seems. Overall brightness is the same. In both cases we're at f2.8. So if we're just looking at the brightness part of Lowlight performance, we don't have to do any translations. f2.8 on APS-C gets you as bright an image as f2.8 on full frame. So what about the other part, noise levels? The devil is in the details, so let's zoom in. Much cleaner image on the full frame camera. Rule of thumb, full frame beats APS-C by roughly a full stop. So let's go from f2.8 to f2 on the APS-C camera on the left. Then let's lower the ISO accordingly and let's see what we get. Not there yet, but the A7 III is a lowlight beast, so I didn't expect anything less. Let's drop to f1.4. Yeah, 1/2 to 2 stops better noise performance than APS-C. Okay, that is substantial. But as you can see, up to f2.8 on full frame, APS-C can hold its own if you're using fast glass. And it wouldn't have to be f1.4 in lots of other cases, because the Sony full frame cameras really are lowlight champions. Main takeaway here? The lens by far is what matters most when it comes to lowlight performance. Using the Sigmas, the 16-30 and 56mm f1.4 gets you roughly 24, 45 and 84mm f2 full frame equivalents at excellent price points, So, for brightness alone, no translations needed. To match noise levels, usually the APS-C lens has to be a full stop faster than the full-frame lens, so you can drop the ISO of the APS-C camera by a full stop accordingly. With the Sonys in particular, aim for more than one stop, preferably even two if that's possible. Alright, part 3. Decision-making time. Quick recap. Form factor, APS-C has it, hands down. Except maybe for some professional applications where actually bigger is better. Price, better bang for your buck for most people, for sure, with APS-C. Dynamic range and color, well, full frame has it, but you can tweak the image and it's become pretty close in base performance in recent time. Field of view, low light performance, bokeh, easy to compensate for in most situations, if you apply the tiny bits of math I showed you. Meaning, so far, choosing full frame over APS-C doesn't seem to make a lot of sense for a lot of people a lot of the time. And what can I tell you? I think that's exactly true. It does not make a lot of sense for a lot of people a lot of the time to choose full frame over APS-C. So, let me tell you why I own a full frame body, to give you a specific example of the decision-making process I think you should adopt if you want to decide between full frame or APS-C. Start with the scenario you work in. Identify the problems of that scenario, translate them into technical requirements and work back towards the gear that will give you what you need. So I landed a job with a company that pays me to document construction sites that are operational at night some of the time, with stills and video. Lots of the work is hands-on roadwork out in the open with dirt everywhere. On the ground, on the machines, on the people, in the air. Roadwork also means limited space to move around in because of nearby traffic. So let's break this down. Stills and video means mirrorless over DSLR. At night means low light, means Sony sensor and a fast lens. Out in the open means weather sealing, means A7 lineup or higher. Dirt everywhere means no changing lenses, means fast zoom lens. Limited space to move around in means fast super wide angle zoom lens. And that means 1635 f2.8. So the main reason I own a full frame body is simply that there is no equivalent APS-C lens to this 1635 f2.8. Just doesn't exist. And that's exactly the point you, preferably at least, want to arrive at. The point where other options just don't exist, because then you don't have to make a decision at all. The reality of your situation makes it for you. And the cool thing about those decisions is they will never come back to bite you in the ass. In other words, I think a full frame camera should be able to pay for itself via the work you do with it. So that's that video. Whew. If you liked it, if you found it helpful, please make sure to leave a thumbs up, it's greatly appreciated. Any kind of comment or feedback is welcome and I'll try to answer as quickly as possible. All the tech that I've used in this video is linked in the description. As always, thank you so much for your time, thank you for watching and hopefully see you again soon.